I will just call for apologies first of all and then make a few explanations. We have Dawn Kitty coming in by phone from Melbourne. Morning, Dawn. And I have an apology from Jaco Arbry, who has leave of absence, and also from Mayor Temby Powell, who is tied up with the situation that has occurred at Whakaari Island, White Island, and is meeting with the chief executive of the cruise ship company and over there at the ship this morning. So I will be in the chair this morning, and because I'll just have a motion to accept those apologies, if I may. Councillor Morris and seconded Councillor Horace. All those in favour, please say aye. Hollis, sorry. Against? That's carried. There may be a few slips this morning. We've been under a bit of pressure to get everything organised. But before we begin our meeting this morning, I do want to acknowledge the tragedy that has occurred, and we'll take a minute's silence and all stand in a moment. But we are aware that there have been 5 confirmed fatalities and there are still 8 missing, most likely presumed to be fatalities, but officially have not been acknowledged in that way. It's just the most terrible tragedy to have occurred. We are very connected, of course, to Whakatane, and with the cruise ships coming in here and then passengers going down there, this is something that affects us all. The Mayor was out there this yesterday evening and got back at about 3 o'clock this morning, and has been keeping closely in touch, as has Chief Executive Marty Grenfell. So I'm just going to ask you all to please stand. We will, after the 1 minute, I'm asking Peri Kohu to come and just lead us in a short karakia. But let's just give our thoughts and our prayers to those that have been affected, the families that are travelling here now. Thank you very much. If we remain standing, please, I'll just ask Peri to come and to the microphone there, Peri, and lead us in a karakia, please.
Ka ino tātou. E pāe tō matu nui te rangi. Kia tapu tō ingoa. In humility we bow our heads as a community in Kamipori in a prayer and acknowledge thy hand in all things at this time as we listen to the groans of Papatūnuku. As we grieve for those who have passed through the veil these past few hours, we offer a prayer on behalf of them and those and their families, that knowing that thou would comfort those that are mourn. We offer a prayer, E Pā, for those that are gone to the rescue, that they might have strength to their arms, for the rescue teams that might have the strength that they need to complete, to fulfill the assignments that are theirs at this sad time. We pray for the leaders of our community that would lead the pathways of rescue that they might also have strength of mind and have thy guiding hand upon all those who are working to relieve the pains of Pakari. We pray that thy Spirit will accompany them, that will accompany us throughout this time. As we open this meeting, tēnei tō mātou inua te kia koe pai runga tēnua tapu o tau tama, tō mātou kai whakaora i Hukrati, a ke tonu ake, Āmene. Kia ora.
Thank you, Perry. This morning we will have 3 public forums to hear. Each will have 10 minutes, and we'll begin with Buddy Makari, accompanied by Colleen Spiro. If you'd like to come forward, Buddy, please. I do have to be fairly restrictive on the time this morning with the agenda we have in front of us. If you leave any time before the 10 minutes, there'll be an opportunity for questions. Otherwise, we will move on to the next forum. Thank you, Buddy.
Kia ora, Mr Deputy Mayor, councillors, morena. Before I start, Chairman, I want to say that the Māori community is in full support of Mayor Tenby's statements last night and stand ready to assist in any way we can. My understanding from a conversation this morning with the Chairman of Te Rūranga o Ngaitarangi and the Chief Executive Officer that the Whareroa Marae is on standby to assist potentially with temporary accommodation for grieving whānau and for those involved in the search and rescue aspects of the whole sad affair. Kia ora koutou.
Colleen, could you just turn your microphone off there, please? Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I appear here as a member of the tangata whenua of Tauranga Moana. I whakapapa to the 3 iwi of Tauranga, Ngāti Ranginui, Ngāti Rangi and Ngāti Pukenga. My whānau have been here in Tauranga since the 13th century. My submission today, Mr Deputy Mayor, relates to council proceedings, but before commencing I just want to acknowledge how inordinately proud I am of the fact that the council has seen fit to display on the walls of this chamber the document central to the foundation of our country, the Treaty of Waitangi. A great part of my life has been devoted to working under the auspices of this document to achieve a proper and practical reconciliation of treaty partners and the fair and just resolution of many historical grievances. I'm here, sir, to honour the memory of my grandfather and his fellow Ngāi Tamarāwaho Hapu members who fought long and hard to have those grievances addressed, and it is this treaty that has enabled us to get to the point of nearly having those grievances resolved. So the late Baron Cook of Thorndon, easily New Zealand's most eminent judge, described the treaty as simply the most important document in New Zealand history and commented that even for those who view the treaty as a threat, it has become the essence of national life. So it's eminently clear to me that the Local Government Act 2002 imposes an obligation on council in its day-to-day business to reflect and give active effect to the principles of the treaty. I refer you to parts 1, 4 and 6 of your governing legislation and the treaty principles derived from Treaty of Waitangi jurisprudence over many decades. For example, under the partnership principle, there is an obligation to provide opportunities for Māori to contribute to council decision-making processes, and through various means such as Standing Committee and the Tauranga Moana Collective, Te Rangapu, tangata whenua are provided with such opportunities. The Te Rangapu arrangement is of long standing, in fact, predates the 2002 Act, having come into existence in 2000, something which I believe was indicative of the forward-thinking approach of the Council of the day. These processes are of themselves merely a precursor. It is giving the deliberations of those partnership forums effect through council decision-making where the obligation is discharged. Council obligations in respect of Māori values and interests do not, however, stop at the LGA. There are other legislative obligations where both the treaty and Māori interests and values are central. That with which I am most familiar in a field in which I've spent nearly 25 years working with is the application and observation of Part 2 of the Resource Management Act 1991. Under this Act, Council has a determining role as a consenting authority. The preamble to the Act directs that in achieving the purpose of this Act, all persons exercising functions and powers under it in relation to managing the use, development and protection of natural and physical resources shall recognise and provide for, in section E, the relationship of Māori and their culture and traditions with their ancestral lands, water, sites, wāhi tapu and other taonga, or section 7A, where the council shall have particular regard for kaitiakitanga, the ethic of stewardship, and most importantly, section 8, which requires that council take into account the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Now, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you have in your midst a councillor who publicly denies the Treaty of Waitangi, which he is on public record as describing as a joke, as being past its use by date, and as can be attested to by Colleen Spiro, here beside me, who witnessed the incident, stated that it should be burnt at a party to celebrate the occasion. As far as I'm aware, that councillor has not resigned from that position, and given the obligations I have just described, it is clear that the councillor has a predetermined position vis-à-vis the treaty and its principles, and therefore a conflict of interest in LGA terms. It is my submission to you and the councillors that the councillor is not approaching the business of council with an open mind and should therefore be excluded from any discussions that might impact tangata whenua or which have a tangata whenua component, which is more or less everything dealt with by council. Furthermore, it is my submission that for this reason, any decisions made by council to which this councillor has had input have to be considered unsafe and subject to legal challenge by anyone so minded. I suggest that the council itself, in knowingly permitting this situation to continue, might itself be in breach of the LGA. I strongly recommend that council seeks a legal opinion on this matter, but in the interim, so that the business of council can proceed, the councillor should be stood down until this matter is resolved. Under your existing standing orders, section 1.1 principles, the last 4 bullet points in particular, I think the councillor is in breach. His predetermined views and statements and his complete refusal to acknowledge the legislative obligations to that section of this community for whom the treaty and its principles underpin their place and participation in the same community mean that he should be stood down on that ground as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Buddy. Now there is time for a couple of questions. They, of course, need to be questions, if I might remind members. This is not to be debated, it's just a presentation from a member of the public. Are there any questions you wish to ask Buddy Mackay? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, Buddy, thank you for a very considered presentation this morning. You mentioned in your words Māori being at the centre. One of the phrases used, Māori at the centre. Who else is in the centre? Who shares the centre?
Just looking for that particular quotation, Councillor. Pardon me. No, I'm not picking that up in my submission, Councillor. Are you sure you heard that right?
Absolutely. We can check the audio and video later, but it was just, you know, if you can't remember a reference to it, that's fine, but I was interested in what that meant or understanding. I'm seeking clarity, that's all.
I've got the statement in front of me. I just said that there are other legislative obligations where both the treaty and Māori interests and values are central. There's an issue with that.
I think that's the answer. We'll have one last question from Councillor Clout.
Kia ora, Buddy. Thank you for coming in this morning. Just checking, are you speaking on your own right, or are you speaking on behalf of a wider group? Can you just clarify that, please?
Speaking on behalf of my whānau, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Buddy, and Colleen for attending. Thank you again, as Councillor Robson said, for the measured way in which you presented that, Buddy. Thank you. The next presenter in the open forum will be Philip Brown. Are you here, Philip? Yes. You no doubt heard the instructions at the beginning of that. We will have 10 minutes maximum. You represent yourself, or is it the Papamoa Residents Association, Philip? Could you clarify?
Papamoa Ratepayers and Residents Association. Okay, good morning, Deputy Mayor, councillors, council staff, guests and other speakers. We are very pleased as an organisation to present to this annual plan session. I would say that most residents in Papamoa are conservative and consistent and want consistent, honest local leadership using common sense and logic. We do not like mock consultation or no consultation, i.e. talking to the community after the plans have been fully developed and when it's too late to change the direction of the ship. Currently, we're going through the vandalism of changing our unique street light designs for shovel LED lamps. Every subdivision had its own design. We're also going through the problem of the unexpected planting in the Wairaki waterways. We're also going through chip sealing over the top of hot mix. Our community would like to be in the steering committees when an idea is a kernel within the Tauranga City Council. After all, the real knowledge of the local conditions and what works and does not work lies in the knowledge within our local people and communities, and not always in the silos of the council. The other night, the committee met to discuss what PRRA would like in the next annual plan. And the main thing we want is to keep the rates unchanged for the next year. Many in our community are on fixed or declining incomes, and there are only two ways of reducing rates. You either cut back on expenditure or keeping rates unchanged, cutting back on new spending and reducing current expenditure. The key points were, number one, develop an IT system, recording system, which can tell instantly the true cost of projects to date, including the cost of council staff. Let's have knowledge. The question is, can the departments of the Tauranga City Council do a zero-based budget each year for the annual budget? Number two, to reduce costs, slow down new developments around town in favour of upgrading existing infrastructure. Number three, stop Tauranga spreading further and further away from the CBD. The further development is from the CBD, the higher the infrastructure costs. Come back and renew downtown Tauranga area first. Slow the growth of Tauranga. This is a big one. Do not subsidise the infrastructure costs on new development. As we understand, before a new subdivision can start, TCC and the developer agree on the total cost of the new infrastructure required, the roads, the sewerage, etc. At the completion of the subdivision, the developer only has to pay the agreed value, even if the final costs exceed the original value. The answer is simple: increased the agreed value at the start, and if excessive, pay back the developer. After all, the TCC is advancing the money to the developer. Number five, cost projects with accurate construction costs and include GST. Why cost a project with unknowns estimated? A message to council staff: treat the ratepayers' money as if it was your own. Don't gamble on the outcome. Then the community will know the true costs and can make real decisions. How many blowouts and costings have we had recently? Phoenix Park, Durham Street. Takes us back to point one. Develop IT recording systems which can instantly tell you the true cost of projects to date. Number six, do not hide projects until the design work is complete and then announce them at silly low estimates when they really are going to cost a lot more. More transparency and common sense, please. Do not waste money, i.e. the proposed upgrade of Elizabeth Street and the 15th Avenue upgrade. What a wasted opportunity that one is. Complete essential roading infrastructure. There may be an anti-car lobby in the Tauranga City Council, but roads are all we have at present. And the roads will be required in the future, regardless of words like work from home, autonomous, self-drive. And for every driver we move into alternative transport modes, buses, e-biking, walking, another driver will take their place on the road, such as the growth of Tauranga. Make the roads we have more efficient, remove the bottlenecks, for example, 4-lane bridge at Turret Road, manage the major intersections better, promote ride sharing. It all helps. But as the population keeps on increasing, so will the traffic. Number 9, develop an e-bike highway system. This is low cost. I requested money for scoping this last year to no avail. Just as a little footnote, I'm available to be on any working group for this. 10, slow down the growth of Tauranga until we catch up with the infrastructure. 11, we started with keeping the rates to no increase, but we have the elephant in the room, the proposed curbside collection of recyclables, which could add around 10% to the average rate bill. Nobody knows the true cost, I know, but working on $250 additional cost per household, this will take $14 million out of the local economy per annum. We all agree waste minimisation is necessary. However, there may be, and there are, cheaper ways to do this. Tauranga has the chance here to think differently and work with the community and not penalise the community. And of course, we have the increase in the waste levy, which is going from $10 to $60 a tonne in 2023, which the taxpayer union has estimated will be $120 extra per household per year. This is a debatable number, but once again, it is another increase in rates. Locally in Papamoa, we need to upgrade our major road, Papamoa Beach Road, to a modern, safe standard. Over 13,000 vehicles per day travel on this road. It has now reached the threshold to be sealed and hot mixed and channeled at the same time. Another question, why was Te Okaroa Drive made as a very tight two-lane road with inconsistent design when it will become a major thoroughfare? 13, zone more land for large areas of open space and parks in the new subdivisions, and then do not sell the land later. Become visionary for the future, plant trees and create places to get away from the 400 square metre section. 15, do we need all the consultants that the Tauranga City Council employs? What is the total cost of consultants per annum? Back to point 1. The latest revamp of the bus services has been a bit of a shambles, with patronage showing a decline. If you want workers to get out of their cars, and to use the bus, then travel times must be similar to using their cars and a direct route, not wandering all over Tauranga and changing buses. For example, we would like an express bus from Papamoa Mall to downtown that only uses the expressway and runs all day. A public transport mantra is, if it's of value to you, you will get to it, to use it. These are some of the points that we came up with our meeting. We are keen on having a no rates increase. And in summary, we appreciate all you do for us. We know it's a tough job being councillors, trying to balance the needs and wants of a community. And thank you for that. And I'd just like to finish with one thought. We all liked Tauranga the way it used to be. That is why we all came here. Let's get smarter and work together to get that balance back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We have time for one question. Is there any questions from any members? Dawn, do you have any questions as the one of the ward councillors for the area? Are you still hearing us? Not sure. Okay. Technology can be challenging. Well, thank you, Mr. Brown. There seems to be no questions. We appreciate your presentation. Our final public forum this morning is from Lauren Minchox and Hamish Ellis. Hopefully I said your name correctly, Lauren, from Lime Scooters. Councillors will remember we had a presentation informally to us just to test how our interest would be in this, and so here we are at a public forum where we can hear a bit of information and ask some questions. So thank you, Lauren and Hamish. 10 minutes is your time.
My name's Lauren Minchox, and I'm the Public Affairs Manager for Lime Scooters in New Zealand. I'm here with my colleague Hamish Ellis. He's the Operations Manager for Hamilton and Christchurch at the moment. Thank you for your time to be here today. So Lime has a vision for micromobility to be part of a convenient and sustainable transport solution for towns and cities across New Zealand, and we'd be privileged to trial our scooters in Tauranga, especially in the CBD initially. Now, you will have all heard of Lime Scooters, especially over the last week, and regrettably not always in a favourable way. So I'm here to provide a bit of background about that and who we are. So Lime started in 2017. We now operate in more than 130 cities and more than 30 countries around the world. We launched in New Zealand in October last year, in Auckland and in Christchurch. We then launched in the Hutt Valley and in Dunedin, and in August we launched in Hamilton. Since we started here, riders have taken more than 4 million trips, covering 6.7 million kilometres, which is a huge achievement. We've also experienced some very low lows. Earlier this year we experienced an issue where the wheels could lock suddenly on some of our scooters. This issue has been fixed, and since February we've not had a single occurrence anywhere in the world, and we're confident in the safety of our scooters. We've also tragically had a fatality involving one of our riders on a scooter, and several serious incidents in Auckland in previous weeks. Unfortunately, there are always risks associated with any form of transport, and we have no reason to believe or any evidence that any of these incidents were caused by scooter malfunction. Safety is our top priority, it always has been and it continues to be, for our riders, pedestrians and other users of the transport network. We've invested tremendous resources to ensure riders know how to ride safely. Everyone who signs up to our service must complete a how to ride tutorial, which is reinforced with ongoing in-app messaging, supported by brand ambassadors on the streets and regular safety events. We use software technology to incentivise and encourage best riding and parking practices. This includes geofencing specific areas and providing guidance about where and how to park. In addition, we work closely with community stakeholders to ensure we're meeting their needs, and we're continually designing new functions to improve the safety for our riders and our ability to monitor scooters. Our scooter is the only one on New Zealand streets at the moment that has been designed in-house and engineered for the sharing economy. It's robust enough to withstand regular use and the New Zealand weather. In terms of the recent news from Auckland, we've not been banned and the door is still open for us. We missed out on getting a permit for 6 months and we're extremely disappointed in this decision. We're working hard to find out why and we're working very hard to come back. We remain the biggest operator in New Zealand. We have permits for nearly 3,000 scooters and a strong local team of 130 people to ensure we can deal with any issues, communicate with residents and provide regular reporting. We've also created jobs for more than 500 people, the juicers who pick up and deploy our scooters every day. We approach our relationship with councils as open, collaborative and solutions focused. We acknowledge that the micro-mobility industry is in its infancy, which is why we're committed to working together to find a way to make a significant and positive impact on your community. We're here for the long run and we would be privileged to be able to start a trial in Tauranga. Thank you for your time and any questions?
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate that. Questions, Councillor Robson, then Councillor Granger.
Hi Lauren, nice to see you again. Jobs for 500 people. How much does a juicer earn in a week?
That varies, so juicers can earn, they work however much they want to, so some juicers work full-time and have invested in their own vans. We have heard from juicers in Auckland who earn $1,000 a week. We've got a Christchurch couple who have saved enough for a house deposit. People are earning good money.
Thank you.
Councillor Granger, then Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Lauren. Who's got the...
That's me.
Look, just coming back to Auckland again, as many do, many ask, and you said that they're not banned in Auckland. From what I've been told and advised, that some of the safety features on the bikes don't come up to their level, and the council has disagreed, and of course they said no, they're not to be in Auckland. Can you just give us a little bit more clarity on that?
Yes, so first of all, safety is not an issue, and the council has said publicly that safety was not an issue. Our scooters are the safest on the streets. What we have been told is that other companies offered better plans to manage nuisance on the streets, but we haven't been given any detail about what that is. What I can say is that Lime has operated in New Zealand for a year. Micro-mobility is very, very competitive, and the operators, 3 of them who are coming in have not operated in Auckland. They've not been tested, and we don't know what their plans are. We have, and Hamish can probably add in here as well, he's an operations manager operating Christchurch, which is a huge market, and Hamilton, and we've got staff who manage scooters on the streets. We have the best technology to manage scooters. We know when they're falling over. There's a lot of information that has been misrepresented about the Auckland announcement.
Thank you. Councillor Morris withdraws his question. Councillor Clout and then Councillor Horrells.
Thank you. So just to get some clarity, you're offering a trial in the Tauranga CBD. What would be the ideal number of scooters, and would there be a geographical limitation to where they would go? Just if you can clarify the trial concept. Thank you.
So we haven't gone into a significant amount of detail with the areas, and we're very keen to work with councils to ascertain where the connection points might be. We're reading into the 2018 cycle plan as to connecting where people live, where people work, where people play. That's the objective of what we're trying to do. I think to answer your question, we'd be looking between 300 and 500, but obviously that would depend on the size of the area in question. And absolutely we can massage that to fit the needs of the council.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
I've got a question about safety. You've got a lot of statistics. What's the number of incidents per kilometre, and how does that compare with other forms of micromodality? Maybe cycling or things like that.
I don't have an incident rate for per kilometre, but I can tell you that incidents occur approximately 1 in 2,000 rides result in a claim. That can be anything from a bump or a scrape. So that's a fraction of a percent of rides result in injury, which is lower than other forms of transport, including cycling. And off the top of my head, I think I read the other day that there were more than 300 road deaths in New Zealand over the last year, and we've had 1 scooter death. Obviously different rates of transport, but...
Yes, another question.
The fatality, was it the result of, was it the fault of the scooter rider, or was there other factors at play?
We have no evidence to believe that it was a malfunction of the scooter. We are working with the authorities, and it's before the coroner, so it will be.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? So finally, just from me, that a trial such as the CBD Limited sort of Brown Street to Memorial Park is feasible for you. You can limit the scooters' use in that area. I think we'd be concerned if suddenly someone hived off over the bridge and went down Totra Street or something like that. You can guarantee that the scooters will stop.
Yes, we can limit where the scooters will go.
Well, thank you for coming down to present. We will continue the discussion. We obviously don't make any decisions today, but there will be an opportunity to process it with the Chief Executive and the staff, and get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you very much. Members, we'll now move to the acceptance of any late items. There are none. There are a couple of items that relate to Mission Street, which will then form part of, if we proceed with that on the 17th, that will form part of the full agenda that day, and I suggest we leave it just to be wrapped into that. No other late items, so confidential business to be transferred into the open. Is there any queries about that? There are none. So we'll move to the confirmation of minutes. Any change to the order of business? We'll stick with what we have, I think. We're making progress through. I understand one member needs to leave early, but hopefully we'll get to an agenda item there. So the confirmation of minutes, page for those with the paper copy, the page 7, the minutes of the inaugural council meeting. Happy to move that, Councillor Robson, or questions?
The record is incorrect in my view. With regard to on page 9 of the electronic copy, 3.5, appointment of Deputy Mayor, I abstained on that decision.
There's no query about that. That'll just be amended by the staff before it's signed off. Thank you. Those minutes, all those in favour, mover, Councillor Clout, seconded by Councillor Morris. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. The next minutes are the council meeting of the 5th of November. Are there any corrections or comments there? So if we could have a mover for those minutes. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury, seconded by Councillor Robson. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And finally, the ordinary council meeting on the 19th of November. Are there any matters arising from those minutes or corrections? So if someone would move that. Thank you again, Councillor Salisbury, seconded by Councillor Clout. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. So then we come to the matter of the presentation of a petition. And Graham Ellis, I believe, is present. Where are we, Graham? Thank you, Graham. As you've heard from earlier presentations, we have 10 minutes. If you leave time for some questions, and then that will be forthcoming. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Mayor and councillors. My name is Graham Espy, and I'm representing the residents of Orienta Parade and the surrounding streets. Thank you for your inviting me to your council meeting to speak about the petition you have had the opportunity to read regarding the changes to Beachwater subdivision lighting. The reason for this petition was to put on hold any changes being made to the lighting proposals until consultation with council and residents. Firstly, I'd like to say the residents of Orienta Parade and adjoining streets were shocked to hear about a change to our street lights, mainly the removal of the classic bell housing that holds the light globe. We are not opposed in any way to LED lights. We have been told that LED bulbs cannot be fitted to the existing bayonet fitting inside the bell housing, but after inquiries it seems this could be achieved. I would like to show you some photos of our lights and what they did look like and what they could look like. Could you just go back? Oh, the first slide was the subdivision relating to the lights that we do have at the moment. It's through Beachwater, present down Palm Beach Boulevard and around Oriental and the side streets. That's the full extent of these lights that we're talking about. So next, please. That's a photo of the street lights during the daylight. Very nice. Sorry, that's the wrong order. This is just becoming on dusk. The lights are just starting to take the ambience. Further as dusk resumes, you get that beautiful orange ambience of the lights projecting onto the street and onto the lamp standard itself. Next, please. Yeah, that is when the light is in full function. This is what the council is proposing to do. Remove the bell housing and completely ruin the whole look of the lighting as it is. A second proposal is to chop the whole top of the light off and put that lovely looking light on there. These are the alternatives. It's an LED light that could be fitted to bell housing without any problems. That is an instant of an LED light fitted to a bell housing very similar to ours, so it could be achieved, I'm sure. Thank you for that. So we feel the removal of the bell housing would desecrate the appearance of the light standards completely. The existing lights show an ambience unlike no other, both day and night time, and we feel by altering that would downgrade the appeal of our street and subdivision. Deputy Mayor, we would like the residents would like a subcommittee from council to discuss alternatives to retain the belt housing with an LED light fitted. This would not be setting a precedent, as we're aware that 2 other councils have already fitted heritage lights in their areas. To summarise, if you read the last paragraph of the petition that you have had the opportunity to read, we have had a fairly disappointments in the way of, as the previous speaker spoke about, the chip sealing of our roads, the disgrace of the waterways planting project, and now removal of our beautiful light. So I think that's about all I can say at this stage, and I do hope the council will strongly consider our proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Espy. We have time for some questions. Councillor Granger, then Councillor Morris.
Perhaps a question through the chair to the staff, just in regards to presentation by Graham, and thanks for that. The light fittings that he showed, is there a possibility that they could be used?
Yes, there is a possibility they could be used.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just following up from Councillor Granger's question, if there's a possibility that those types of fixtures be used, will staff investigate that in regard to this particular subdivision, or would it be better to have a formal direction from council on that matter?
Through the chair. In receiving this petition, we have stopped the installation of the lights and are going through a process of understanding what we could do differently and what the implications of that would be in terms of cost and maintenance and operations and precedence, I guess, as well. So if we do it here, what would it mean for other parts? So my suggestion would be that we receive the petition, we'll look at the options, put a proposal back to council for consideration, and I think also in light of the discussion here that we could look at having a subcommittee of some description around that.
And I assume that would involve further consultation with the residents as well, is that correct?
Yes, we would like that very much.
Yep, I imagine that's part of the process. Any other questions then? We just have a mover for the receipt of the petition. Thank you to Councillor Morris, seconded Councillor Hollis. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis, for your Mr. Espy, sorry, for your presentation, and I hope you've been assured that staff are going to look into that, and we'll see where the process ends up for you.
Yes, thanks for giving me the time to present this petition.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you. Now, as we move into the decision-making part of our meeting, of course, I need to see if there are any declarations of conflicts of interest. Are there any? Is Dawn on the line? She is. Okay, so no conflicts, Dawn. Thank you. So we move to item 10.1, which the item regarding 11 Mission Street. Allow me just to find the correct page, which begins on page 40 of the agenda. We have Dana and Bridget with us to answer any questions. The situation is that subsequent to the presentation, where we were, as part of the orientation, we had an update, and there was an indication from some elected members, both from returning members and from new members, that perhaps there might be a desire to look at not just the ratification of this, but possibly another option, provided there was adequate consultation with the Elms and with the Otamata Trust. That was clarified, and I've clarified that with elected members. And so the proposal today is that we would defer this decision to the 17th. There will be a resolution in a moment put up on the screen, which will keep both options alive for the 17th and will enable the new members to have all the material that was given to the previous council in terms of the submissions and the deliberations and the reports that were completed, and then that decision would be made on the 17th. It would also mean the Mayor would be present, and also I think Jaco Arbery will be then able to join the meeting by electronic version since he's on leave, and I believe Dawn will be back by then. So with that understanding, if there are any questions you wish to ask of our staff before I put that motion up, and then we see where we go with it, but it's going to come all back on the 17th, in which case we should try and reserve some of the time today for the other matters on the agenda if we could. Are there any questions? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it's traditional in situations where decisions are made and there have been submissions, that if members haven't been present for the submissions, there is some concern over whether they're, have a right to, if you like, be involved in the final decision. In that regard, will the new members be given an audiovisual copy of the submission process so that's available to them so they can make themselves familiar with the submissions? Because not everyone, if you like, writes their entire submission. And a lot of people make the effort to be here, and I believe those people have a right to be heard by the new members.
Okay, thank you for a reply.
Yes, the audiovisual record is available, and we will distribute that, make it available.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wonder, for clarification, if the subject is deferred today to the 17th, just some clarity around what those options are that we'll be considering on the 17th. Are they different to the ones in this report, or they'll go up on the screen? Yeah.
Up on the screen as part of that resolution. And along with that material will be a legal opinion that has been sought on the process so that we know we're operating correctly, and that when a decision is made, whichever one it is, that it's clear under the law that those making that decision are doing so appropriately. So maybe we'll put it up, Councillor Clout.
Thank you, and this is probably just normal procedure anyway, but just given that there'll be quite a lot of public interest in this, at what point will the public have the agenda available for them to review and make their thoughts known to us?
It'll be the normal procedure. It'll be a normal council meeting, so the public will have it in the normal days beforehand with a full report. Yeah, it would be Thursday. Yeah, Thursday afternoon it'll be available. All right, so if we could put the motion up, and we'll just allow a little time for you to read that, or I'll read it out perhaps. Thank you, Bridget and Dana, thank you. Okay, I'll read it for the benefit of those who are watching live stream. That the Chief Executive provides a report to the, it's not the extraordinary, it's the council. Is this the correct one, or is it? Yeah. Is this the correct one? Okay, so it's not an extraordinary council meeting, it's an ordinary council meeting, if we could amend that. On the 17th of December, 2019 on 11 Mission Street, Tauranga, that includes the following. Options available to Council, including transferring the land to the joint entity, representing both parties' interest, or revocation of the existing Council resolution on the 24th of September 2019, and transferring the land at 11 Mission Street to Otamata Trust, subject to a lease to the Elms Foundation, or transferring the land to the Elms Foundation. So those will be the three options that are in the report for the 17th. Confirmation that the Mayor and councillors have been provided copies of the public submissions and summary of submissions and minutes of previous council meetings, and has just been added to it the live stream, which is on the council website, where the submissions were heard and considered. All relevant material that post dates the submissions. I will move that from the chair and seconded by Councillor Clout. Just speaking briefly to it, I think it is a matter that we need to resolve fully with council present, and I think the debate ought to occur on the 17th if we are deferring this. Any other speakers to this resolution? Yes, Councillor Morris, then Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, democracy has taken place, and we have a new board present around the table. And I think it'd be useful to mention that on Monday last week, there was an expression of some elected members that we look at this decision again in the light of the new membership of the council, and it's entirely council's prerogative to do that. Any council can do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Robson.
To acknowledge the point made by the first speaker, that's absolutely correct. With regard to the legal advice, would it be possible to make the legal advice public? We have a tradition of withholding legal advice and also noting before I cast my vote that our legal advice isn't always accurate. Having personally challenged and overturned legal advice that's been received by this council, I'm conscious of the fact that we mustn't represent it as wholly writ, but rather advice. And in that regard, I'd also like to see us publish the brief or the request for the legal advice so that we have both publicly available, that is the legal advice received and the brief or request that preceded the legal advice. Is that possible?
I'll ask the Chief Executive to reply to that.
Yeah, given that this is a procedural matter, the legal advice can be made available in public. And to the point that I don't know that legal advice is right or wrong. Essentially, it's a different interpretation potentially between different legal firms. So,
Councillor Hughes.
Just in regard to Andrew Hollis participating in this decision, have we had legal advice around that?
No. Chief Executive.
I've sought some.
Thank you.
So that would come to that meeting as well, would it, or be given to elected members at some time?
I can advise council of that.
Okay, thank you. Final question, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, clarification on the seeking of that legal advice. Can I ask when that advice was sought? I understand that in relation to a Legoima request that touched upon the issue of Councillor Hollis's involvement, that the response to that request suggested that there had been no advice sought by council with regard to Councillor Hollis's involvement in decisions. I'm just checking that this is obviously a new development post the answer to that Legoima request.
It was Sunday night, probably at about 5 o'clock, I think I sought the advice.
Thank you. There are no more questions, then I can accept a mover of the motion, or I'll move it myself. I will move it myself and seek a seconder. Seconded Councillor Salisbury. Oh no, I've already did that, didn't I? Apologies. So no other speakers. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Okay, that's carried. Dawn, can we hear from you?
I said aye, yeah.
Thank you. Did I hear that correctly? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Any abstentions? Okay, Mr. Councillor Robson, an abstention. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item then, which is the annual plan. The staff would like to take their seats to assist us. This is page 133. We have Catherine Sharplin and Tracy Hughes and Joel Peters. Pardon? And Paul. Will intro. Thank you very much. Paul Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to introduce the annual the annual plan paper. Hopefully it goes better than that. Okay, so this paper seeks advice on a number of issues around the annual plan. Just to summarise those issues before I pass over to the team to go through in more detail. Obviously, the actual content of that plan is the key element. It also refers to the rating structure changes that were adopted as part of the LTP. As part of the resolution of the LTP, we were to review those changes to look as to whether to include targeted rates as a replacement for that. So this paper covers that as well. And it also covers an element around the risk reserve, which currently, as we reported through the annual report, is sitting in a significant deficit, not a cash deficit, but an accrued deficit, which we can talk to in more detail as we go through. So I'll pass over to the team to go through that paper in more detail.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for a presentation to come on screen. Is that... Okay, thank you. So just a recap. So the last time we saw you was last month, and we just talked to you about the purpose of an annual plan. Currently we're in year 3 of the long-term plan cycle, and so you can see us on the screen there as we are here. So it's a requirement of the Local Government Act that we need to adopt an annual plan each financial year, and it sets the work plan for that financial year, this year being year 3 of the long-term plan, and it identifies what's changed from the long-term plan. And it also sets our direction for the year, provides accountability to the community. So there's been some changes from the long-term plan, but in general, the LTP priorities, they're still relevant. So population growth, transport, travel choice, planning for natural hazards, maintaining quality of the environment, and providing amenity and opportunities. Some of the changes we talked to you about at the last meeting were changes to cost and timing of the capital program, revenue being lower than anticipated, and operational expenditure has changed in some areas, and we'll cover that in further detail today. So what we're going over today is we're going to cover the proposed budget variations. There'll be Tracy and Catherine taking us through that. They'll also take us through financial considerations, risk reserve, discussion on rating impacts with the proposed year 3 changes, and Jim will take us through the rating structure discussion. Following that, I'll come back in and talk us about through the process of where to after this meeting, and then we'll just cover off any decisions.
Good morning. The first thing I'd like to talk you through is the basic profit and loss account that we've included as attachment 3 in the report. This is a slightly contracted version, I suppose. The version in the report includes a column which shows a comparison against the long-term plan numbers. The reason we included that in the report is that firstly, it gives you an idea of how much things have moved in the 2 or 3 years since we were looking at the long-term plan. Secondly, we are required to report the annual plan against the long-term plan. However, when we look at rates increases, we always look at it on a year-on-year basis. So what's, I suppose, important to us at the moment is that we're looking at what we're proposing for next year against what we resolved for the current year. If I could just take you through that line by line at a very high level. So we've come to a position where we've built this up from the bottom, we've looked at it activity by activity, and this is the overall position that we've come to, which is a gross average of a 6.9% increase. If we take growth off that, which we've assumed to be 1.2%, we come to 5.7. That's a gross average, so it depends whether you're a residential ratepayer, a commercial ratepayer, depends on the value of your property as to what the increase will actually mean to you. Grants and subsidies, you'll see a substantial percentage increase there. In terms of dollars, it's probably not the biggest thing on that page, and it relates almost exclusively to operational subsidies from NZTA. Fees and charges, you'll see a significant decrease there in fees and charges, and that relates mainly to, there's some things that you'll not be unfamiliar with, some decreases in parking income. We're assuming that the sale of elder housing occurs, which results in a decrease in income. And, excuse me, lost my place. Also decreases in forestry income and regulatory services income. If we move on to expenditure, there's a significant increase in personnel expenses. This covers market movement, progression through grade, some restructure that's happened, and an increased focus on planning and engagement. Excuse me. Depreciation is a function of asset growth and revaluation. So we've had asset growth since the budget was set for the current year, but at the same time we've had a revaluation on some assets which has reduced the value of those assets. So that's come out at an average of 5%. Finance expenses is a function of year-on-year growth in borrowings, which we would expect with a capital program, but also lower interest rates than we would have expected. There's a number of movements in the other operating expenditure category, which are detailed in attachment 3, but overall at 4.3%, that's less than the increase in rates. And then at the bottom, you'll see we've got an operating deficit. That operating deficit reflects unfunded depreciation and also loan-funded operating expenditure, which is largely around planning, which gives us a benefit over a long term. So that's the P&L. Also in the report is a pack of about 40 or so pages. So we've given you a snapshot of each activity of council. We've looked to cover what it does, some of the more major capital projects that might be involved in that activity. You'll see also that we're not just looking at 2021 there, we've got future years, again to give you an idea of context and also commitment into future years. There's some key drivers as to what is making up the financial profile of that activity, and some graphs on the right for OPEX and CAPEX. We've chosen stormwater because it's quite an interesting one to look at on one level, which is that if you look at the OPEX there, you can see quite clearly the grey and orange parts of the graph represent finance costs and depreciation. So there's been a significant CAPEX investment over the last 10 or so years, And what this means down the line is you get a very large proportion of your total OPEX being interest and depreciation costs, which we have limited control over.
Right, so I'm going to take you through the capital budget aspect. So that's summarised in paragraphs 16 to 18 of the report and in attachments 1 and 2. And as you've seen from Tracy's presentation, we've also, by activity, given you in that attachment 4 a breakdown of the key CapEx associated with those activities. Just to try and, it's quite hard to get a handle on all the details of the capital program. It's really big, so we've summarised things in a way that hopefully will help you to get that picture. So this first attachment is also our first effort, thank you to Digital Services, at utilising our new data warehouse and having our first foray into data storytelling. So it's pulling information from the warehouse, so it's just factual information, but presenting it in a way that's trying to tell a story. So overall, you'll see from that there's a net capital program that we're budgeting of 180 million. The Waiari treatment plant program of work is by far the largest individual initiative. We provide some breakdown in there of the other sort of top 10 areas of spend. And also in the land sales part in the purple, we're saying that our debt in this draft budget assumes sale of elder housing. So the other sort of potentially interesting story is around new initiatives. So that's things that we haven't done before that we're doing in the capital program. There aren't a lot because we've taken this approach of this is year 3 of the LTP. We're trying to sort of hold it more, really just working with what was in the LTP and adjusting for what is deliverable in this time frame. There isn't a lot of new initiative, and the main spend in there is the bins for the curbside collections. Right, so if we just move on then to the next, again, it's another we've got in this attachment a pictorial reinforcement of what our priority projects are, and then attached to that on the back is a list of the program for those people who just want to be able to read in more detail. And again, the growth projects of Waiari and Tamanga are very dominant, and there is also quite a large emphasis on other infrastructure. The Digital Services Capital Program, which is identified as one block of work, and the curbside collection. So in summary for the capital program, what is in there is based on what was in the LTP. We have looked at deliverability and achieved a draft budget that's financially sustainable at 180 million. It's actually a program of work of 215 million, but we've had what we call a portfolio adjustment because we believe that some of those programs will be delayed, and so we probably will only spend the 180 million, so we only budget the interest, etc. on that 180 million. So that, we can probably cover off any questions you have on that. And then I'll just move on briefly to the relationship with the financial considerations that sit around this budget and as it might flow into the LTP and the issues you'll face next year. And also we'll mention briefly at the end the risk reserve. So there's 3 graphs in your attachment 6 that look at the capital program that's likely to be achievable over the next 4 years, and that enables us to stay within the debt to revenue ratio limit of 250%. So as you'll see, our debt level is rising and our revenue levels are not rising quite as quickly as had been planned in the long-term plan. So we're starting to move into move closer and closer to that debt to revenue limit. So this first graph is based on the current budget we have before you.
the likely levels of expenditure that we could sustain through the capital program. So we've got the 180 million proposed for next year, and that takes us up to a debt to revenue ratio of about 225%. And then if we can constrain the capital program to around that 190 to 205 level, we could stay within those kind of desired limits. We've also given you a couple of graphs following that look at if we collected more revenue through rates to cover off the debt basically that's sitting in the risk reserve, that gives us more capacity to deliver the capital program while staying within our debt to revenue ratios. So if we were to have collected an additional, say, 2% of rates that was to go towards recognising that deficit in the risk reserve, we would have capacity to spend an additional 10 million odd a year on CapEx. We have included, just to identify for you the challenge you're facing, we've included what's currently sitting in our corporate planning system for the capital program for the next 4 years. And we've just smoothed that out. It comes to about an average of 296 million a year, so another over 100 million more than we're putting in this year's budget is sitting in our corporate planning system at present to cover off the growth-related projects and other initiatives that were looked at as part of last LTP. The reason they are so high, and you'll see from that graph, to deliver them as they're currently sitting in the plan would be financially unsustainable. The reason we've got to that situation is because there has been recostings and some change of scope in that capital program, which has moved the costs up considerably, and because the revenue has not moved over the last 3 years as was budgeted in the LTP. So what was sustainable in the LTP is not now sustainable. And that's sort of part of the hard decisions we'll need to address as part of the LTP. The last point I was going to cover off then relates to the risk reserve, and we currently have a deficit in that reserve as a result of events that have occurred over the last year, and needing to recognise a likelihood that we will have to pay out some money, particularly on weather-tight issues, with some ongoing costs associated with Bella Vista. So we had at year end a 15.5 million deficit. The current budget, as we presented it to you, is based around an additional 1 million going to the risk reserve each year. It would take us 15 years to address the deficit, and that would not provide money to address any other unforeseen events that arose. And so while the approach of this annual plan is to try and sort of deal with business as usual, not ask you to make too many major strategic decisions this early on and to save those for the LTP, we felt it was important to give you some options to consider around addressing some of that problem with the risk reserve. So we have here a table that says if you put an additional $1 million into the risk reserve, it would have an impact on rates. So it would move up for the median residential property rates by a further 0.6%, but it would mean that we address that deficit in half the time, so what would take 15 years to address under the current budget would be addressed in 7. And we also have proposed, if you increased rates by 2%, so created another 3.4 million to offset that risk reserve, that would be the impact on rates, would move median house residential rates would move to 6.1%, and median commercial rates to 13%. So those are choices that we have presented in the recommendations. So hand back to you, Joel. Oh, okay, so what have you got on this one? Oh, okay, so this table is just summarising for you, based on the averages we proposed, which is the median residential property and the median commercial property, what would a general rates increase of the type we have budgeted look like? So the first line, it says the draft annual plan rate, which is assuming the rating structure changes that we've proposed for year 3, would have a median residential rates increase on the general rate of 3.8%, which is $1.80 a week, and for the median commercial ratepayer, 14%, which is $8.76 per week. And then the following lines are looking at movements in the risk reserve. So if you put an additional $1 million in the risk reserve, the median rate would increase to 4.6, which is $2.07, and the commercial rate would move by 15%, which is $9.30 a week. And similarly, there's a further increase at 3.4. At the bottom of that table, we've summarised what would happen if you chose not to move to the rating structure for year 3 of the LTP. So that is not to move the UAGC down to 15% and not to move the commercial rate up to 1.2 times. And you can see there, if you didn't change the commercial differential, the general rate impact for the median residential property would be 4.6% rather than 3.8%. And for commercial, it would be 9% rather than 14%. If you didn't move the UAGC, which is the fixed rate component of rates, down, again, the median house price rate would be higher, because if you don't move the UAGC down, every household pays a higher fixed rate, so that has an impact on your median residential ratepayer, and it also has an impact on your commercial ratepayer, so their rates would be at 10%. If you changed neither, you would have a very similar rates increase across the residential ratepayer and the commercial ratepayer, and it would be a 6.3% rate on our currently proposed budget. So that's a lot of numbers and a lot to absorb, so hopefully people have had time to read and will have further time to read this report and look at those numbers, but hopefully the presentation has kind of helped direct your thinking, and we are open to further questions. Now, we did have Jim here to provide some background, because we're asking you to confirm year 3 the rating structure changes, and so we thought it would be helpful for the new members to have just a quick summary of why those the changes to the rating structure were made, and to provide some of that background. So,
good morning. So this is just a quick recap of the decisions that Council made in the last LTP regarding rating policy and rating structure. So Council at that time was concerned about rating affordability, particularly in the lower value rating properties, which had a strong correlation to household incomes. The issue at that time was that Tauranga had a high UAGC fixed charge, had the maximum of 30%. I had no differential on no general differential on the commercial properties. The range of rates paid by low value and high value properties was relatively narrow, so that means that low value properties paid very similar rates to higher value properties because of the fixed charges that we had in the rating structure and policy. The capital value of residential and commercial properties was similar to all other cities in New Zealand, and the general rates paid by the commercial ratepayers were 14% compared to a capital value of 17%, and that's because of the high incidence of the uniform charge, which took away a large proportion of the variable general rate. And this compared with the average of 35% to 65% in other metro centres in New Zealand at that time. So the issue, the problem at the time was the capital value by sector. Commercial sector had 17% of capital value and paid 14% of the general rate. Now, in order to achieve equity there, Council proposed and to introduce the differential of 1.2, which would bring parity with the residential sector. So that moved some rates from the residential sector to the commercial sector, so that both sectors paid roughly the same amount in the general rate. So this is just looking ahead to what's happening right now in New Zealand with the other metros, and just to give you an idea of where we sit in comparison with the other cities. So our uniform charge is 600 at the moment, which is 20% of all the rates. The LTP decision was to lower that amount to 15% over 3 years, which is the third year of the LTP. As you can see, the other metros have around about 10 to 12% uniform charge. Hamilton is increasing theirs next year, probably heading up to 15%. And you can also see with the commercial differentials, Tauranga has the lowest commercial differential at 1.134, proposing to move up to 1.2 in the third year of the LTP. And the rates paid by the commercial sector in Tauranga is about 16% compared with an average of about 32% in the other major centres. And that's just a graphical illustration of exactly those numbers. You can see what shape we look like compared with the other metros. That's it for me.
Excellent. Is that the end of the presentation, John?
Nearly. I just want to reinforce that this is the time frame for coming back to you next year. And the most important part, I suppose, is in February. This is when the decisions of today and the direction that you give us, we will be working towards, we'll be bringing it back to you in February. And so that's the refined budget based off what happens today. There'll also be decisions on any known issues and options. One of the largest ones we know now is Attachment 7, so that's with Bay Venues, and their request that will be coming along in February as well. So a key part today as well, any other issues and options that you are aware of, we probably need to know earlier as well, before Christmas, so we have that chance to work through them over the period before February. Okay, thank you. So.
Thank you. If I may just clarify, A, B will leave the risk reserve as it currently is. If we move a C, then there are the two options. And I think on page 138, it's clear that the staff recommendation is the 4.4. Is that correct? As a recommendation of the...
Through the Chair, that's correct. Just in terms of the first comment, the LTP included $1 million into the risk reserve, which continues, so there is $1 million under without any further additional.
So do we need to move C1 anyway, or C2, or do we just, if there's a mind not to change anything, do we not move any C? I just want to clarify that, if we can.
Choose not to, it's already included, so it just confirms it.
Thank you. Any questions, please, of staff? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. Just a few little questions. The first one is, I note that you've got elder housing there as a sale, but my understanding is we're going through quite a lengthy process of reviewing what we do with that stock and potential further development opportunities. So is it realistic to see that sale figure in this in that particular time frame? That's my first question.
Through the Chair, it will be tight to move it into that financial year. However, what I would say is the main impact on it is on balance sheet, and those balance sheet ratio issues hit in subsequent years. So whilst it's important, somewhat the timing can be flexible over the years.
Okay, thank you. My next question relates to curbside recycling, and I think we've got $9 million in there of capital. Was that for the bins, was it? And also, will that have any flow-on effects to OPEX in that 2021 year, or will it be the next year?
Okay, yes it is for the bins, and there will be some costs next year, but the budget is presented based on those costs going to reserve, and so the charges wouldn't start until the service started. So there is will be a small interest cost as those are incurred, which would go to reserve to be recovered the following year.
Thank you. Two more questions, if I may. In the past, we've used the term average or mean rates increase, but you've chosen median, which actually shows it as a smaller percentage than we would normally be referring to. So I just want to make that point. And when it comes to any future resolutions, that we'll just have to be very aware of that. So because there is a bit of a difference there.
I'm assuming that's a question. So if we could have that answered.
My understanding is we used median last year for house price in our presentation. So the median was just, I guess, chosen as a clarification of what average meant, and the median is the middle. So if you look at, it's probably a little bit hard to read in your report, but if you look at that orange table, the median is the halfway mark, and there's percentages sitting at the top of that table which show there's quite a concentration at a relatively similar house price for that first half, but there's a real upward tail for the other half. So if you take an average, the number you're looking at is more than halfway, and it is influenced by those very high value house prices.
Thank you. So a question is to my fellow colleagues really is how we handle that, but that's a rhetorical question right now. My final question, if I can remember it, I'll come back
I'll
to
leave
it.
you
Thank
to think on that one. Councillor Hughes, then we'll have Councillor Morris, and then we'll have Hughes and Hollis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Using the question time to foreshadow that I'm prepared to move something at the appropriate time.
Hughes?
Just looking at the commercial rate percentage, we're a lot lower, and even when we go forward, we're still a lot lower, it seems, than most other cities. Has there been a historical reason for this, and are we looking to rebalance that over time, or are other councils, is the trend towards going further down?
Through the chair, this dates back to when we introduced capital value rating. At that time, the decision by council was made to remove differentials. We had a paper in terms of the last long-term plan which sought to bring that up to sort of the lower end of the other councils, which was around a 1.6. Through consultation, that process, that was brought back to 1.2, with a view that there will be a more detailed review as to the application of targeted rates which may be used to replace that differential over time. That detailed work hasn't occurred because we needed to do the work around the strategy and the benefits flowing to actually do that targeted rate work. So that is envisaged to happen as part of the long-term plan, and the question is whether we can, councillors decide to continue with the movement in year 3 or defer that to that conversation as part of the long-term plan.
Further comment from Christine Jones?
Just adding to what Paul was saying, when the change was made in differential, there was also the introduction of the economic development targeted rate, which went on to those commercial users. So while the differential reduced, the economic targeted rate went on.
Okay, next question is from Councillor Hollis, then Robson, and then Councillor Clout's memory's kicked in.
I'm going to try clump a few together, so if it's a bit clumsy, we'll work through that. Has a zero-based budget been done for the budget that's presented to us? And as councillors, do we get the opportunity to go through each expense line, for example, and make it really clear that money's been spent wisely and not overspent or missed? I'd like to just get some comment around that.
Through the chair, we haven't zero-based for this particular annual plan. We have done it on select items in the past to recognise that a large portion of the expenditure is actually driven through the capital program, particularly this year's capital program. So to zero base is difficult when a lot of those costs are actually flowing from the existing program, and also a large amount that are actually already within long-term contracts as well. So we have done it around some of the smaller items, but not through the entire program.
Second part to go line by line would be a process through the after submissions and so on. Is that? Could you comment on that?
Decision of elected members as to whether they wish to do that.
A question from Councillor Hollis. Yep.
Oh, sorry. The risk reserve increase and taking effectively $3.4 million from ratepayers to top up a fund that obviously does need topping up. I'm concerned that that money isn't actually being used. We're playing catch up on that, and it's coming out of the pockets of our ratepayers. So I'm not very comfortable with it. So the question would be: is there any way to not just keep topping it up out of the ratepayers' pockets? Could we fund that 15 million deficit, for example, a different way?
Paul Davidson, could you reply?
Through the chair, in the absence of any funding, it's debt funded. So what we're doing at the moment is, potentially unfunded liabilities are sitting on our balance sheet. So there isn't a potential funding source effectively at this point without just capitalising onto debt. We will bring you options in the long-term plan around how we deal with potential or options to separate out leaky homes, because it is to somewhat the risk reserve conversation is twofold. It's a conversation about intergenerational, i.e. should existing ratepayers contribute to debt, or should it be through when is it incurred and you borrow for it? And the other is in terms of balance sheet capacity, because as some of those graphs that Catherine put up show, anything that's funded through debt is restricting that balance sheet capacity. So they're the two issues that really revolve around that risk reserve.
The main thing is that $3 million is about 2% of rates. It was 2% of the increase that we're being asked to ratify, if you like, is just that. It's just that one issue. So that's 2% extra for that. It's not a question. I'll get on to my my next question there. The big one for me is the waste fee, which is going to be seen as rates and sitting at, I'm not sure, it's not this time, but next year when we do it, will be another $300 odd going into the pot, which will make people's rates rise well into double figures. And I'm concerned about the amount of pushback from the community over exactly that. I'm getting a lot of inward traffic right now. I guess I'm concerned that of the thought of it being compulsory, first of all, and secondly that it is going to increase rates by a significant amount, and we're talking about 4.6s and things like that when the real number is significantly higher. Is there any thought about how we can soften that blow?
To be honest, no. The costs have been brought in, and as Catherine said, funded through a reserve until the service is provided. But once an additional level of service is provided, then that will form a ratepayer cost for that activity. Noting that, and I know it's not all people will pay the private service now, so there is an offset, obviously, from that. Noting that, obviously, it's not, as you say, it's not across the entire city.
Yeah, I think we should clarify when that kicks in and whether it's an LTP decision or whether it's in submissions of the annual plan. Can you clarify?
To clarify, the actual rating cost isn't incurred until the 22 financial year. However, there is significant expenditure that will go out in the annual plan year. That would need to be, if there was any change in decision, that would need to be funded somehow.
So my main concern is about the thought that it will be offset by existing bin payments. So 7 trucks go past my place picking up various bins. Those people probably won't see a dramatic difference. What I'm worried about is at the lower end of the street that put out a black bag once every 2 weeks. For example, this falls straight into my mother's camp. She probably pays $50 a year for her waste. She recycles. She's near Malemi Street, so she recycles. Her costs are very low. And I think that we have about 20% of our population are elderly. I don't know how many are on fixed incomes, but this is going to affect them dramatically. It's not going to affect me.
Sorry,
I'm fine. But
Councillor Hollis, it is a really good point. I just asked the Chief Executive to respond because it will be a subject of a separate issue to be debated then.
Yeah, through the Chair, that's exactly right. It will be the subject of a number of standalone reports specifically on this issue to be debated and decided by Council, separate to but part of the annual plan process. We're proposing to brief councillors in the 3rd week of January on this particular issue, and then there'll be a series of reports, I would have thought, March, April, May. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, in an executive briefing, this is scheduled to be one of the first executive briefings early in the new year. I guess subject to availability.
Next question, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it was going to be a question about at what point will elected members get a chance to consider the broader issues in this area of rate setting. And I think I've had confirmation that they're going to receive an executive briefing in the 3rd week of January. So thank you for being ahead of me, not for the first time. But in that regard, I suppose I'm looking to ensure that not only are we briefed, but we get a chance to discuss, consider and reflect some of these broader issues to our community. So I suppose my subsequent question is, at what point are we involved in engaging our community, and how much thought has been given to the sort of pre-engagement issues around this? And the reason I ask that is we have a significant number of new councillors. We have a new mayor. I appreciate Jim's...
Sorry, Councillor Robson, there needs to be a question.
Yeah, well, the question, I've given at what point, I gave the question, at what point are we going to do the engagement with our community? And subsequent or conditional there is, at what point are we going to get sufficient clarity and understanding of some of the prior decisions we made? Jim gave us some information on some significant underlying philosophical issues, and some of the questions we've already heard in the chamber reflect the lack of knowledge. That's not a reflection on the elected members, that's a reflection on the process that hasn't informed them. So,
ask the Chief Executive if he'd respond to that question.
So just for clarification's sake, are you talking about the general rating impost on the community and decisions made, or are you talking about the curbside waste proposal specifically?
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about the general, and then when you come down from the risk reserve issue, the balancing of capital value versus share of rates, the commercial differential issue, the UAGC issue, the curbside recycling issue, the general equity issue, the...
Sounds very much like a financial policy decision for the LTP, but what we can do is early in the new year, and prior to Council having to make any decisions on this, we can provide a similar type briefing and or forum where these issues can be discussed.
If they were in public, sorry, just to follow on, if they were in public at some level, because I'm talking about engaging the community, we often get into a situation where talking to ourselves, but the community is not properly informed.
Yeah, I think with what the list of issues that you have just raised, in my view, decisions made around Council's overall financial policy, which essentially is reset once every 3 years through the LTP process. That's not to say that some points within the current financial policy can't be tweaked or amended through an annual plan process. And should that happen, then you'd normally consult through the LTP process. Sorry, through the annual plan submission process. Yeah.
All right. Just in regard to that, the issues around waste minimisation, remember that is out for consultation. I think it concludes this Friday, is that correct? Someone can confirm. So the public are well engaged with that, and we will hear their responses through that. Councillor Clout, final question?
Yeah, I did remember my question, my final question. The contributions to risk reserve, is it shown as a separate line item on the rates bill? Is it a targeted rate, or is it just encapsulated in the entire rates demand? So I just wanted clarification on how it's presented. Thank you.
The latter, so it's part of the general rate. There's no specific.
If that concludes the questions, I am aware of Councillor Morris's indication, but I am going to move the motions because I've had conversations with the Mayor prior to his having to depart this morning, and I want to put the motions as recommended. I will... Yeah, we'll wait till Councillor Granger returns. We will, of course, as we enter debate, go beyond the 2 hours. We'll need a resolution to carry on there, but aware that Councillor Hughes needs to depart soon. I don't know how soon, but we might get a chance for her to make a speech at least before she goes. I'll move all the resolutions A, B, and the recommended C2 and D, 1 and 2, but I'll take them all individually. Separately, I think we should debate them all together, and then we'll vote on them individually, and then if anyone wants to make amendments to them individually, they can, if there are certain ones. Are you still with us, Dawn? Just checking.
Yes, but the communication's really bad. I can hardly hear.
Okay. Sorry, we will try and improve it. It's just awkward on this thing, but should you wish to speak to these motions, please just speak up loud and we'll put you in the order that we can. Okay? So do I have a seconder for A, B, C, 2 and D, 1 and 2, please? Yeah, I'd like to move them all if there is a seconder for all of them. If not, we of course will revert to alternatives. Okay, thank you, Councillor Salisbury. In speaking to it, I believe we have the information in front of us from the staff. This is not a setting of the rates. There is still a big process to go through next year, when we obviously go through the normal annual plan process and submission period where we will make changes. We will listen to the community and maybe add or extract issues and items. But particularly around the issue of the risk reserve, it is something that has been sitting there for a number of years, and there have been resolutions in the past to try and address this. I believe it's the prudent thing to do. Whilst we can rely on debt if we have a crisis, we may find we actually can't because we're already too close to our 250 percentage, in which case we would be having a difficulty addressing something. We know of issues out there that are liable to come home to roost at some point and cost us money, which we would rather not. Of course, it's not a choice. It's something we're going to have to deal with. So I think it's prudent to address this. The rates proposal is not the final rates, but it is from the staff's recommendation about where we sit now. And in order to bring things down, it would require further reductions in areas of spending. We've heard already this morning from a submission submitted that they want to keep rates low, but then I believe he went on to name a number of things they would like out there at Papamoa, which will all cost money. This is the reality of what we deal with, and we sit here to make the best decisions we can. So I'm happy to move this and allow everyone to make their decisions going forward. The seconder, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Salisbury? Okay, you reserve that. Any other speakers? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move an amendment to B, which reads according to the pre-prepared version that I sent through. Largely, the first part of it is the same. B endorses in principle the annual plan draft budget for capital and operations, but where it changes, it says is within the envelope of a mean, and I do emphasise mean, residential rates increase for 2021 of no more than forecast inflation plus growth plus 2%, with a second one underneath that, direct staff to provide options to council to achieve this rating level and the pros and cons of these options. And should I have a seconder, I'll speak to that.
Do we have a seconder for that, Councillor? Please, Councillor Robson, microphone, please.
I just want to check the logic of the wording versus the intent. I understand, because we're referring to mean residential rates increase, should the word plus growth be actually in the wording there? They don't believe they should, because the mean takes the growth factor out. So can we tidy the wording before we start considering it?
Through the chair, mean residential rates would imply that growth, that it's an after growth figure, because it is the average for the ratepayer. So that I think is adequate.
So the wording is adequate?
I'm happy to accept that.
I have a question before I find a seconder. Comment from the Chief Executive, please.
Yeah, I don't know that we need the direction. We will just provide options back. So if we could avoid the direct staff, that would be helpful.
Are you happy to leave that out, Councillor Morris?
I'm happy for the wording to say for clarity, to say that staff report back. It's for clarity, for minutes. That is important, I believe.
I'll have a question before I seek a seconder. And I'm just not sure how endorses in principle the annual plan draft budget can be achieved if we're now having a huge rate reduction in that. Isn't that something of a...
I'm happy to answer that. It's not a rate reduction, it is a rate increase, and it is a significant rate increase. I think we need to be careful not to call rate increases decreases.
So is there a seconder for it? If not, let's speak to it, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the proposed approach on the screen addresses the issues we have as a growing city, but also as a community that has increased demands. But it also balances that with our residents' willingness to pay and indeed their ability to pay in some cases. Now, using the median figures previously, we were talking about $1.80 a week in terms of a rates increase, and that may not seem like much to my fellow colleagues who have had significant pay increases over the last few months. But to, well, all colleagues have had significant pay increases. Some have been more significant than others. And if you look at people at the bottom of the heap, the proverbial heap, people on fixed incomes, every time we increase rates above inflation, they have to decide what they are going to do without. So $1.80 a week might not seem much to you or I, but to somebody on a fixed income, particularly the pension, that's a couple of loaves of bread removed from your shopping basket every week. And that's just reality. We can try and sugarcoat it any way we like, but that is the reality for some members of our community. And I think we need to acknowledge that. It's certainly not a rates reduction, an average rates increase, should we get to that following consultation of inflation plus 2%, which does include growth, is significant. And when you consider that amongst our peers, we are among the highest rating councils in New Zealand, and we do not offer a curbside waste service like they do, it certainly does not paint a pretty picture. So we need to balance our aspiration with our community's willingness to pay and indeed their ability to pay. This does not, as the Chair has said, lock us into a particular number, but it enables and provides clear guidance to the council staff that we would like to see some options to fit within that envelope. Thank you.
Thank you. The seconder wish to speak?
There's a few things around this which unsettle me. One is a question of good governance. Is governance information tailored enough to the needs of the governors? And is it set out to help them understand it fully in the time that they have available? And that's certainly a question that I think needs to be addressed. Certainly as a new councillor, there's a hell of a lot of information to soak in and make good decisions on, and then decide what next year's bills will be that we need to pay. In my opinion, increasing rates without due diligence is rather like giving money to a teenager who keeps asking for money for weekend parties but refuses to do his chores. And I hope that every councillor who votes for step one of a 40% rates rise will be held accountable by voters at the next election, because in my opinion it's a failure of fiscal responsibility with ratepayer money. If it goes to 40-odd%, that's nearly a month of salary lost to the people below the median, and a month worth of spending power is a ton of money, and it will make a huge difference to a great number of people in this city. So I particularly stood on a position of transparency and frugal spending, and I really don't want to disappoint those people that put me in here to make sure that that happened.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I will support this amendment primarily because of a commitment that I made during the election campaign, whether that was wise or not to make that commitment. But I did make a commitment to adhere to the rates cap. On the knowledge, though, that it does give us some limitations going forward, particularly in our capital program. So for this annual plan, that is something that I would like to stick to, given also that the staff are coming back with pros and cons of that approach. So I look forward to hearing what those, particularly the cons of that approach are. But I'd also be quite comfortable in putting on public record that when it comes to the LTP, which we will be discussing very comprehensively next year, that given all of the amount of information that's going to come to us and the implications of the way we set rates, I will be reconsidering my stance on the rates increase. But certainly I want to keep that commitment that I made in the election campaign. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I don't support the amendment. I believe that we need to. We've got a lot of big pieces in our future that we need to get sorted in our council. We need to be brave, and we need to support the future generations in what we do today to ensure that our city is resilient. And a lot of the projects that we're doing now are about the future resilience of our city. So I think that from my perspective, we need to have safeguards in it to allow for that kind of for whatever contingencies should arise. But I do acknowledge that I think that the waste component of what's coming in the future needs to be carefully looked at, so that, because that has a much bigger effect than this effect does. So I will be interested in seeing how that we can support those at the lower end a lot better through that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I won't be supporting the amendment either. I know Councillor Morris often likes to talk about our being the highest rating metro, but we already saw in a chart.
Point of order. I did not say that we are the highest rating metro. Yes, we are amongst the highest rating of our peers. The record will show.
Okay. The record also shows that the chart that was put up before, why that is. We have a significantly smaller commercial differential. We have been adjusting our UAGC, and that is what factors that average residential rate. So I think we do need to be transparent and open about the real facts. Secondly, it's a little early to be talking about the next election. I did hope we might have moved on before we started thinking about election promises or whether we'll get re-elected. We have a duty here as the governors of the city to meet its needs. And whilst there is an impassioned argument about those who are perhaps on fixed incomes and struggle with rate increases, there are also many people in the city who have enjoyed a 40% increase in their net value in the last 3 years from their property values going up. And they are wealthier as a result if they need to work out how to use that wealth to meet their obligations with rates. I do not believe we can hold the city back from its needs. This is not a budget, and it's not even it's still such an early stage. It is simply the beginnings of this process. It's not full of wasteful spending and so on. We will have opportunities to address that as we go through the process. But we should, I believe, take the staff recommendations. They are the ones who deal with these numbers in great detail. They present to us their recommendations, and I believe that's what we should be supporting. So I will not be supporting this amendment. Any other speakers? Dawn, would you like to speak if you're here?
No, I don't need to speak, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Robson?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that the topic has arrived at council in the way it has. I feel that a number of my colleagues have had insufficient time, regardless of where their natural proclivities or their election promises, which I believe they must remember, we mustn't forget them too soon, sort of box them into. I feel that the nature of discussion already gives me some concern about the deeper level of understanding required, and I'm trying to understand why we're making some of these decisions right now, because it seems to me that we're not making decisions. We don't do that effectively until June. This is really guidance to staff, as far as I can tell, guidance to staff, and could have been phrased in a way that, like that, and it hasn't been, and we're actually being asked to make here some decisions, and I realise I'm speaking to an amendment here, but others have sort of broadened it out into the more general issue. So I'm assuming I have the leave of the chair to do the same. Yeah, I'm concerned that we're sort of making decisions here without really understanding the complexity and the interrelationship between some of these components. So in terms of the amendment with the change, I'm happy to support the amendment. I assume we're still going to be taking these issues then one by one. And as such, if we get a chance to speak to them all one by one, would that be the case, Chair?
No, there will be no debate on them one by one. I've said we're debating after this amendment is dealt with. We will be proceeding on the original motion, which is all...
Well, in which case, as I haven't spoken to the original motion, I can obviously still have the right to speak the original motion after we've made the decision. I'll leave my discussion with regard to the original motion or the broader motion, substantive motion, till then. But with regard to the amendment, happy to support it. I understand the good place from which it comes. I understand the concern it recognises for those people, you know, who are less fortunate in our community, of which is a significant number, including all those, of course, that some third of our population who haven't benefited from capital gain because they are excluded by the very system of getting that gain because they don't own property, yet they are people who are paying rates. There is a sort of an irony there that some who would care for their poorest are quite happy to punish them for their inability to participate in the capitalist system, but that's a broader topic. Happy to support the amendment.
Thank you. I just will have to take a motion to extend our meeting. We've passed 2 hours, if we can have that. Thank you, Councillor Morris. Seconded, Councillor Clout. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carry. We can now continue. Are there any other speakers to the amendment? If not, I'll simply put it. There are none, so all those in favour of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. I'll have a show of hands, please. And Dawn, can we hear your vote, please? Okay, so that is, in favour is Councillor Kitty, Morris, Hollis, Clout, Granger and Robson, and against Councillor Salisbury and Hughes and Baldock. So the amendment is carried. We will return to the main motion now, the amended motion, and we are speaking to all parts of it, which we will take separately in a vote. Are there any other speakers to A, B, C, C2 and D? So Clout.
Thank you. Just speaking to the risk reserve issue, the reason I asked the question before about is the risk reserve contribution a targeted rate is because one of my commitments I did make was that whilst keeping the average residential ratepayer rates increase to the cap, I was also very open to targeted rates as a means of adding extra to that. But now I find that the risk reserve contributions are not a targeted rate. So I'll just stick with the 1 million at this point, which is already in the budget, and I'm happy to see that continue, but not the extra.
Okay, as the mover of the main motion, I will suggest that C actually is left to lie on the table, because given the amendment that just went through, it would be kind of counterproductive to be coming down to a rate cap and then throwing in the extra. So that can lay on the table, and I understand from staff that that's going to be acceptable, to leave that decision until the new year. We'll come back on that. So we'll proceed on that understanding that we'll take a motion to just let that on the table. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, looking at the numbers in the chamber at the moment, I'd be quite happy not to let that topic lay on the table. And but I won't suggest that. I'll speak to the broader motion because I don't believe that's the way we should operate in chamber. I just make the point that we shouldn't let things lay on a table because it doesn't suit the numbers sitting in the chamber. I
have to interrupt you there, Councillor Robson. That is an assertion that was the reason for that being done. It was not. And I'd ask you to withdraw that, please.
I didn't make an assertion.
I'd ask you to withdraw that,
I won't.
please.
I will not. I refuse. I did not make an assertion. I posited a question. If you saw it as rhetorical, that's your choice, Chair. I shall continue to speak unless you ask me to stand aside.
I will allow you to continue.
Thank you. We look, as I said, we shouldn't be in a situation where we make decisions on that basis, and I'm pleased to hear confirmation that we're not. Coming back to the 4 parts of the motion, I think we have some work to do to understand the impact of the UAGC and the commercial differential. I'm conscious that the Productivity Commission is averse in their most recent findings to the concept of differential. I'm conscious that while we have been told that Hamilton are increasing their differential, Auckland have a long-term plan to reduce their differential. Amongst our significant peers, there's no consistency of philosophy with regard to the differentials. Although I would remind my colleagues that the failure to have a differential has probably set this city back a significant number of museums, art galleries and whatevers, as the commercial sector have had a free run on the back of the residential ratepayer. With regard to sticking to, if you like, the philosophy that's managed to win the last few debates around setting rates, I'm comfortable with the amended B. With regard to C, I'm seriously concerned about the impact that such a decision, when it comes, might have, and I'd urge my colleagues to consider fully what the implications of this are. I have spoken before that there are some people that would, for instance, support curbside pardon the Freudian slip, would support curbside waste collection purely and simply because it generates a level of additional revenue which can then be leveraged to create additional debt. And one of the things a lot of the numbers tell us is this year's capital decisions, which seem rates free, are tomorrow's above inflation rates increases. And it's the inability of councils over many years to understand what in the UK Health Service they call the revenue consequence of capital outlay. What more plain speak is when you incur debt, you're going to have a series of bills to pay for a very long period of time. We forever and a day continue to separate the implications of capital expenditure this year with rates, bills, the following years. And we really, I think, need to work on that. And that's why I made the comment earlier on about getting the involvement of our elected members and our community and getting everyone in the right space to make these decisions. With regard to D, totally comfortable. We need quality information from BVL. Again, it's one of those things that was picked up when when BVL made a recent presentation in this chamber. They're inclined to tell us what our contribution to the operating cost is, but not what their impost is on the ratepayer, because they look at OPEX and don't focus too much on the impact of their capital expenditure decisions on the ratepayer. We really need to link those two. We really need to get an understanding of how numbers work. So in regard to the motion at the moment, happy to support A. It fits with my personal philosophy. I remember in the period of time where I was put on leave by the community, I did come into the chamber and advocate that my rates should increase faster than other people's. Having had a capital value increase of significant sum, I believe that I'm in a better place to make a contribution than those that don't own a house, and I'm happy to pay a share of that extraordinary untaxed capital gain I got to make this a better city. I wish that my colleagues and others in the community similarly blessed by good luck would do the same. So I think yes to A, yes to the amended B, definitely no to C, and D, it makes sense.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? In which case I will put the motion in parts. The first A, all those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? Assuming that's an aye, is it, Councillor Kitty?
Yes.
Thank you. Any abstentions? That is carried. The amended B, which I shall read for those who are on the video live stream, endorses in principle the annual plan draft budget for capital and operations within the envelope of a mean residential rates increase for 2020-21 of no more than forecast inflation plus 2%. And 1, council to be provided with options to achieve this rating level together with the pros and cons of these options. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No. 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 So that's, I see the noes. Dawn, is yours in favour? I think it is. You're in favour of the amended B? You moved it, so I assume you would be. Can we hear you? Okay, thank you. So, all in favour, Councillor Kiddy, Morris, Hollis, Clout, Granger and Robson, and against Councillor Salisbury, Hughes and Baldock. We are going to leave C. I move that to lay on the table. Seconded, Councillor Clout. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstained, Councillor Robson. And now D. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. We will now take our break, 15-minute break, morning tea, and return at 11:35. Thank you. Dawn has gone. Are we running? Cameras? We'll reconvene. I'm going to ask if we may indulge a slight change of order to business. We'll just do the reappointment of the Tangata Whenua committee members, just so we're not holding people up any longer than necessary in that regard. Is that okay? With your indulgence, so which takes us to page 220. Thank you, Councillor. And Carlo will come to the desk, please, to introduce it. Thank you.
Kia ora, morena, everybody. Yeah, you've got the report there in front of you. I guess the highlights from it is that the Rangapu Mana Whenua has revised the appointees that they had recommended last term, and 3 of the 4 are available to continue. So that's Dr. Wayne Bilby, Emily Gudsall and Te Pio Kawe. Unfortunately, Anthony Ririnui, who was the representative for the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, due to work commitments, hasn't been able to stay available. So the proposal is that the Rangapu Mana Whenua will go through a process again and look to invite applications from members of the Māori community and go through a process to recommend somebody forward again, and expect to be able to do that by January or February next year.
Thank you. Carlo, are there any questions of this report? Are there questions? Councillor Robson?
With regard to paragraph 11, clause B, which countries has Dr. Wayne Bilby managed? Has been a country manager internationally? Is there a country manager for someone or something? This country here could do with some better management. Is there?
I'll answer in cheek, Councillor Robson. Yeah, I think last time around we actually supplied their CVs for you guys so you could sort of see some of that international experience. So happy to provide that again if that helps.
I have a mover, Councillor Clout, seconded Councillor Morris. Speaking to it, Councillor Clout.
Very quickly, the 3 representatives that have been put forward, we've had on the committees before, so there's a good level of continuity, and I think they all gave good value and contributions, so very happy that we continue along that vein.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, note that this is part of us fulfilling our obligations under the many statutes, but particularly under the treaty that's on the wall, as reminded to us by Buddy Mackay earlier. Is Buddy here to witness this? I think it's a good thing.
Any other speakers? I will put the motion. Just letting you know also that Councillor Dawn Kitty has put her apologies in for the rest of the meeting, so she's not coming through by phone. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll now go to the process for the appointing of an independent chair to finance, page 198. And Fraser Smith, I believe, is going to... Oh, sorry. Paul Davidson will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the process to appoint an independent chair to Finance, Audit and Risk has been taken from the appointment of directors of CCO process. So it follows that process, which is an appointment panel of mayor, 2 councillors and an independent advisor as suggested. It also just confirms around voting rights and a list of required skills and competencies. So if this paper is approved, we'll move forward in terms of recruitment of that position.
Thank you. We will obviously need to put forward some names for those councillors. I think there were some suggested recommendations, but before that comes up, just any further questions of the report itself? mover who would put in some names? Possibly can't be one of them.
That's fine, I understand that, thank you. I would like to recommend councillors Robson and Salisbury to be those two councillors, because one is the previous chair of the Finance Audit and Risk Committee, and Tina, Councillor Salisbury, is the deputy chair of this current committee, so I think they would be appropriate appointments.
And are you therefore moving that?
I'll move all A, B, C and D.
And with those names inserted, is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Hollis. That's seconded. So speaking to it, Councillor Clout.
Thank you, and I understand that at least one council would like this voted in parts, if that's okay. But no, I mean, clearly I think having an independent chair is a very outstanding idea, and there are many councils around New Zealand that do have this, and so I think we're sort of following good practice, and I believe that the 4 people on the appointment panel are very capable of choosing someone of a very high calibre. Thank you to the staff also for putting a list of the key attributes and requirements of such a person, and I'm sure that'll be a good guide to the appointment panel. And I'm comfortable in the independent chairperson having a vote, because I think to attract the right calibre of person for this role, I believe they should be accorded that honour and mana. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. The seconder wish to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things about this that could be perhaps added and that the independent chairperson knows about is if we change from a finance, audit and risk committee to just an audit and risk committee with a finance subcommittee of some kind, just to make sure that that person is aware that that could be a future procedure.
Okay, any other speakers? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My reticence to second was not based upon the proposed nominated members of the appointment panel, but rather I disagree with C. So if you were good enough to put C separately, that would be appreciated by me.
Thank you. Happy to accommodate that. Any other speakers to the motion? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a transition here, but I was reviewing some Office of the Auditor General material last night, and it struck me that there's an irony in one of the articles produced by the Office of the Auditor General talked about, funnily enough, time and space in terms of decision making. And I have expressed already some concern about the way we're approaching this. I think the intent generally is good, and it is best practice to have a separate audit and risk, or perhaps more accurately, risk and assurance committee. I'm sort of warmed a little bit by the chair or the deputy mayor's observation that there is room, we're going to work our way through this thing incrementally. We depends on who's available. They will have a view on the ideal setup. So there's some work to be done in this space. So I see it as evolving, and if that's the spirit that everyone's getting into this space on, evolving and learning and incrementally improving decision by decision, day by day, then I'm sort of okay to support what's currently proposed.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, I will then put them... I will speak in favour of it, of course, in favour of the nominated persons. I think that's a good choice, and we'll be in favour also of C. I think we need to be cognisant that when this has come up before, if the independent chair doesn't have voting rights, it is very difficult to attract the calibre and quality, because it's very much seen as an affirmation of their time spent, that they actually do contribute. And of course it doesn't mean they run council, they simply have a vote on that committee. So I hope we do follow through with supporting that. I will put the motion in parts. A, all those in favour please say aye. Against, that's carried. B, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, that's carried. C, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Okay, so we have in favour Councillor Hollis, Councillor Clout, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Granger and Councillor Robson and Councillor Baldock, and against is Councillor Morris. That is carried. And D, all those in favour please say aye. Against, that is also carried. Abstained on D for Councillor Robson. Thank you very much. That concludes that item. We will now move to the triennial agreement, which is on page 224. Thank you, Coral. Over to you.
Good morning, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything to add to the report. I would note, though, that there is a couple of areas in the agreement where they do refer back to the previous intent. The purpose of local government is the previous one because it was done before the changes to the Local Government Act. But I see that that would be sort of some minor changes and it doesn't actually impact on the intent of the agreement itself. So I've provided you with some options. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Clout.
Thank you, Coral. Just for the benefit particularly of those new councillors, what's the purpose of this triennial? Like, what do they actually do? And just for their information. And those that might be listening.
Yes, I have provided you with some of the synopsis and history of Section 15 of the Local Government Act. Basically, it's around playing nicely together, if I could say it that way, cooperation, and it's also around making sure that there's no surprises, particularly with the regional council if they're looking at any of their services extending. That was the purpose of the amendment. So I think it's really just about cooperation and communication.
Councillor Hollis.
Just to get some clarity over what minor means when the word minor amendments is used.
Yeah, anything which doesn't change the intent of the agreement, probably wordsmithing, or as the local government has changed in terms of the full well-beings, just the inclusion of those. So, yeah.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, then I'll have a mover, or I will move. Someone second. Thank you, Councillor Clout. I won't speak to it. Any other speakers? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. The next item is our meeting schedule. Page 242. And Coral's still there for this one.
Yes.
Thank you, Coral.
Thank you. I don't have anything to add to the report. The meeting schedule itself will be handed out to you in a A3 page so you can actually read it. We do apologise for the quality of the PDF and we will obviously be putting them up on our website. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll just put a question, a bit of guidance in it, but in the July period, there are no meetings scheduled from basically the 22nd of June. Is that correct? No, it's over the page, sorry. From the finance audit on the 30th, so there's no meeting schedule from the 1st to the 14th, and that's when the local government conference is held. It's just a note, and if there is agreement with this from my colleagues, that when we set aside this time, it is a time of this, it's school holidays impact on this part of it, I believe. It's important that it is then blocked out as a no meeting time, because families with children may plan holidays and that sort of thing, and it's just not fair when you plan it and then suddenly some meeting comes up. I mean, if it was a huge crisis, it'd have to be overridden, but I think it's probably good in the calendar if it says no meetings we only have the hearings that are in that period. If there's agreement with that, and if Coral, if that's okay, we could note that so that it does stay that way. I know some councils break for a whole month. Don't know how they sleep, but so we do need a break in the middle of the year after we finish the annual plan and stuff, I think. So any other questions? Councillor Hollis?
Yeah, I'd just take that a little further. It's not just July where the holidays occur. Just to know that on shared care parenting, every other week, some of those holidays will be very difficult to get to. Just putting it clearly that it's not just July.
Councillor Coral?
Fortuitously, the week 5 of our 6-weekly cycle does coincide with at least 1 week of the school holidays. I can't remember if it's week 1 or week 2, so that's just happened very nicely. So we that's for you to have a look at the schedule and plan around those. Thank you.
All right, would someone like to move the meeting schedule? Thank you, Councillor Hollis. Seconded, Councillor Salisbury. You want to speak to it, Councillor Hollis? Okay, any other speakers to it? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. The next item, the CCO letters of expectation, 261, page 261, and thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you. So through the chair, we've developed those letters of expectation this year through workshops with council staff and with the CCOs. And that was all sort of during the election hiatus period. So I'll take the rest of the report as read and the attachments. Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies. It's actually page 246 it begins. Are there any questions? Councillor Clout.
So thank you. Just in layperson's language, can you just explain any key updates? Because this comes around very quickly, it seems, yeah. But I mean, I'm assuming the bulk of it is the same as previous years.
So through the chair, the letters of expectation are our requirements of our CCOs, and then they come back to us with their draft statement of intent in March that we have an opportunity to provide feedback. The main changes this year is we've put more emphasis on environmental and sustainability issues, and we've put more emphasis on people and culture issues, and that kind of ties in with the exec business plan and with our community outcomes as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Robson.
Question through you possibly to the Chief Executive. Mentioned ties in with the exec business plan. We probably need to go through that at some point and get ourselves fully up to speed with that. Is that planned for some point in the...
Well, I think the first thing is the piece of work we need to do to ensure that there's strategic alignment between council and city's strategy and visions and the role that the CCOs play in that. The statement of intents essentially is the, if you like, the legal document that actually binds that together. So my sense is that once that strategic alignment piece of work has been completed, it will probably impact on the SOIs in the next round, yeah. And that, essentially that's identified as a piece of work within the executive business plan, in simple terms.
Thank you, Chief Executive. So any other questions? If not, someone like to move A, B, C and D? Thank you, Councillor Clout. Seconded, Councillor Hollis. You want to speak to it?
Very briefly, as a member of the previous CCO working group, I just want to say thank you to Anne, to her and her team for putting putting this together, and we understand CCOs are a very vital part of our organisation overall, and they contribute a lot to our city. And we go through this annual process, and as I said before, it seems to come around very quickly, but it's in very good hands. So I'm also understanding that the CCO working group will be reconvening at some point. Is that correct? In which case it'll be, it'll be interesting to see who gets appointed to that.
Yeah, that's correct, and we were waiting to see the outcome of that strategic alignment work.
Thank you. Second wish to speak? Councillor Robson.
Yeah, happy to support the motion, conscious that there is a process we work through and it's quite early, particularly for new members, to see how the letter of expectations or letters of expectations sort of frame up this process. But there is work to be done, and it's quite important to maintain a sort of a respectful and productive tension between councils and CCOs. It's a really good group to volunteer to be on. I did it the previous triennium, and it's very important to make sure that that CCO relationship is one of benefit to the ratepayers and the stakeholders in the city.
Thank you. There are no other speakers. I will put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is also carried. Thank you, Anne. Appreciate the hard work you do. Have improved our relationship with our CCOs, I think, as Councillor Clout pointed out. The next item is amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw on page 261. And thank you, Martin Parks, for coming to the table.
For those of new councillors to the organisation, this is a report that features quite regularly throughout the year. It basically gives us the opportunity to add restrictions into our traffic and parking bylaw, and those restrictions can be things like no parking lines, time limits, bus stops, and band turns and things like that. So it's a fairly sort of straightforward report where we've had requests from members of the public, businesses to make changes outside their premises. This current report actually includes a lot of items associated with the 15th Avenue work that we're currently doing, so we can enforce some of the restrictions that we want to introduce.
Thank you. Martin, can you just confirm for all of us, and particularly new members, that when it's come to us, that there has been, as a standard practice, there's been consultation with people adjacent, owners and so on, and so it's really an opportunity for us to see things that may be of concern, but we need to rely on the fact that there has been consultation.
That's correct, yeah. So some of the items obviously require significant consultation, like the 15th Avenue project. Others are fairly localised. You might find it's one or two properties that are impacted. So, but we always carry out consultation with those that are affected by what we're putting into the bylaw.
That's not to understate that members can ask questions about any particular thing in there if there are any questions. Please, yes, Councillor Hollis.
It's been asked of me whether it is possible to make the shopping area of Tauranga City competitive with the other shopping areas during the period of Christmas by making parking 60-minute and 120-minute marked with chalk rather than with electronic means, and no payment at all for a two-week period around Christmas.
So over certain periods we do provide free parking. So public holidays, weekends, parking is free already. So we promote that running up to Christmas. It's difficult to change time limits over that period because that's quite a significant piece of work. We have in the past allowed free parking for certain periods though, which we will look into that. The time may be a little short at the moment to do that, but we'll certainly have a look at it for you. Yeah.
Well, it would, I think we need to clarify perhaps that it would require a resolution to even begin looking into it. And otherwise, because it's beyond the scope of the report that comes here, which has already gone through consultation. I just checked with the Chief Executive. So before work is done, Councillor, I think we'd need something of a real directive supported by a majority of councillors. Can there any comment from staff?
Yeah, well, that's what we would have to do now, unless it would be acceptable that we run it as planned for this holiday season and look into it for coming years as an option.
Maybe on Thursday we could process that if that's okay. Thank you, Councillor Hollis. No further questions, queries about any of those items. We have a mover for 1 and 2, Councillor Clout, and second myself. Councillor Clout, want to speak to it? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that is carried. We now move to the final in the open agenda, I think, which is the new bus shelters update, 288. Okay. There is an amended resolution with this, which will come up on the screen, just to make sure it's clear. Martin, you're speaking to this also, are you? Or Nick, would you like to lead it?
Yeah, well, through the chair, yeah, I can provide a bit of context, just in terms of where we're at, and it's attracted quite a lot of interest, so we thought it would be prudent to give you a schedule and an update of where we're at. I know that many of you have had queries from or comments from the community. Bus shelters serve the purpose of making bus trips a little bit more attractive, of course. So it is a lever that we would like to use to the greatest extent that we can to promote bus travel. They are contentious though, and probably 8 out of 10 bus shelters, the owners of the property adjacent don't want them there. So then we go through the consultation process of if we do get a response during the consultation period, which is 2 weeks, and they don't want it, then we need to sort of make a resolution for them to go ahead. So that's why it's in front of you right now. So I can, if there are any questions, or if Martin, if you have any additional detail to add.
Just before questions too, there is an amended schedule, I believe, which is being tabled just now. Is there new detail on that as opposed to the one that's in the report? Or is this
that is correct. It's an updated version. It is moving rather quickly at the moment, and the reason for that is that we're giving it more traction because the new bus routes, scheduled bus routes, have sort of settled down since they were introduced. So we don't expect any significant changes to that, and that's why it's sort of a high-profile project of ours at the moment, and quickly moving, and that's why we provided an updated schedule.
I'd just like to add to that very quickly that the reason we haven't progressed this previously is because of we were expecting further route changes from the regional council, and moving shelters around and implementing them is a costly exercise to council.
Understood. Questions, Councillor Granger, then Clout, then Morris.
Thanks, Nick and Martin. Just 2 questions in regards to the bus shelters themselves. I see often, as I walk my dog every morning, especially a couple of shelters, as regards to the seats, are they still being made out of timber? And why I ask that is that the maintenance on them must be quite often, and why I say that is, you know what young kids are like and what they do with pens and pencils. Not only that, knives, and so it goes on. But those timber seats are quite vulnerable to that sort of treatment. And I thought by now we could have gone something with a hard plastic seat or something like that. And the second question is just as regards to them being likeable, and people do enjoy them. Yes, they do. not when there's graffiti on them. As regards to graffiti, how's that running at the moment? And if there is any sprayed, which I see now and again, is that maintained very quickly, or as quick as possible when that happens?
With regards to the seats, yes, they are made out of wood. The maintenance is generally a sand and a varnish. That's the level of service that we currently provide. I think if somebody's determined to vandalise something, generally they will do it, no matter if it's plastic, wooden or metal. We do find that the level of graffiti on bus shelters is generally fairly high, but that's managed through our graffiti maintenance contract. So any graffiti that gets reported is removed as quickly as possible. I think we do need to have a discussion about level of service of maintenance of bus shelters as we go forward, but that's probably for the long-term plan. Some of the shelters we've been told are looking particularly shabby. When those are reported, we do go out and spend a bit of time maintaining them, but it's a discussion that needs to be had through the long-term plan process.
The Clout was next.
Thank you. So
Morris.
just clarifying this schedule of bus shelters we've got here. I think you said, Nick, that if a resident doesn't want the shelter outside their house, we bring it here to resolve that it will happen. Can you just clarify, is that the case? In other words, are all of these, or are some of these locations sort of disputed? That's really what I'm asking.
I'm not sure if all of them that say completed have been disputed, but they're completed ones as well. We've gone through that the 14-day consultation process through the Local Government Act, and then whether it was a yes or no. Maybe you can comment on that, Martin. The respective ones.
Yeah, so some of them are, the ones that got complete are, we've been through that consultation process. So if they say yes, they're good to go. If they say no, then we've had an objection. And then there's a large number here that are currently out to consultation. The letters have all gone out to the residents and businesses that are impacted. So we're waiting to hear back from those people at the moment. But as Nick said earlier, we expect that there'll be a large level of objection to the sites that we've promoted.
So thank you. So through the chair, just to clarify, if there is an objection, do we just walk away from that, or do we persevere if we believe that it is the ideal location?
I think that's up to you. We will obviously provide you with an update of how this process is going. The Local Government Act says we need to formally bring objections back to council for you to determine whether they go forward or they're rescinded and we put in the shelter. So that whole process is sort of laid out within the Local Government Act. It will come back to council, yeah.
So just supplementary to the objection, is there a hearing for that? Or they're just noting their objection, you come to us to override or uphold that objection?
The council has to set aside a day for hearing these objections, so there's a formal process that we need to follow under the Local Government Act. Yes.
Who hears the objection?
Council.
Council completely or a subcommittee?
It says council.
Or the
in
hearings
Local
panel?
Government Act, yes.
The whole council?
I believe that's the case, yes. We can do it through at a council meeting as long as we set some time aside to hear the objections. That's what the Local Government Act requires.
All my years, I've never sat in that, have I? Mind you, my years are not that many. Councillor Morris. Any other questions? Then I think we should probably move on with the process and at least get to the point where all the objections can be heard in a meeting. Because these bus shelters are needed. People are standing in the rain, as we know. Do I have a mover? Councillor Morris, seconded Councillor Clout. Wish to speak to it?
Very briefly, Mr Chair, we as a city cannot accept a situation where we have residents, some who are maybe experiencing health difficulties or perhaps be advanced in years, and we cannot simply allow them to be out in the elements while they're waiting for what is a core public service these days. We just have to, as a community, say that that's not all right and move forward with this.
Second, I concur with those remarks. I believe the staff do their best to locate these in a place that is at least obtrusive on any resident. I've seen them where, there's trees there and they're going to stick them in there, and you'd think nobody would object. So we do need to try and process these things according to the Act, but also to provide for our community. Any other speakers? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of our open section. I'll take a motion to move into public excluded. Thank you, press, for being with us this morning. Moved Councillor Granger, seconded Councillor Salisbury. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. Nice to see you back, Sam. Have a good afternoon.